Hi, friends, and thank you for tuning in to the Still Podcast Author Series. My name is Heather Still, and this podcast is to get to know successful indie writers, their books, and their writing process. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you hear and what you see, please follow us, subscribe, follow the links, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And tune in next time. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Still Podcast Author Series. With me today is author Patricia Davenport. Thank you so much for joining me, Patricia.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Tell me about you, Patricia, the writer.
I started writing, I guess, around 2010. And my first book was nonfiction. It took me 5 years to write. But I think that's kind of typical when people are first delve into writing, is that they spend an enormous amount of time writing. And then after that, I wrote a children's book and illustrated it. That was during the pandemic. And I also wrote a book on a nonfiction book on selling wholesale for artists. And then last year, around October, I was, toying a bit with the idea of writing fiction. I always thought I would write fiction one day, but I don't know. I must have had this idea that I would be 80 or something when I start. But so I just played around with an idea, and in 5 weeks, I had written a book. And it just sort of fell into my lap. It was unexpected. And then I wrote the second book shortly after that, which I've now published both of them.
Okay, thank you. So 5 weeks to write your first book, and oh my gosh, I'm going to attempt to pronounce it Vetiver Letters.
Yes, vetiver letters.
Okay. Can you tell me what the heck is a vetiver? Is it a plant?
Vetiver, well, I know it is an essential oil, but is a plant that is, the oil is extracted, and it's a very musky smell. It's one of my favorite scents. And the reason it's called Vetiver Letters is that Edward, the lovely man that Marnie falls in love with, sends her letters, and they have the slight hint of vetiver.
Oh, so it's a sensory thing as
Yes,
well.
yes,
Okay, very cool. And now, do you live in Toronto or nearby?
yes. I live in Toronto. Yes, in the East End of Toronto. I
Uh,
like to call it the Upper East Side because then it sounds like Manhattan, but it's not really.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I think it's kind of nice to not be Manhattan. Like I said, I got all excited about an international flair,
I love
Canada.
Toronto. There's so much rich history here. And some of the places that I'm writing about, I have exhibited my jewelry. I've been a jewelry designer for
Mhm.
just over 30 years. And some of the places I've written about, I've actually exhibited there, and there's still locations that are standing today, which is pretty remarkable over 100 years later.
Yes, and you're talking, I'm a history buff. Like what I do for vacations, we've been to a lot of Civil War battlefields. They're all
Yeah.
turned into museums. So I'm all about the 100-year-old. And so now you mentioned it took you 5 years to write your nonfiction book and 5 weeks to write a fiction book. I'm noticing the five here, but 5 years and 5 weeks is a huge difference. Can
Yes.
you elaborate on that?
Writing nonfiction is such a different process from fiction. I don't feel that my mind works the same way for both,
Mhm.
because nonfiction, you're very organized and you never know when you're finished, because it's not as though the story's complete,
Mhm.
because you need to just keep adding information that you feel people will really need in their business if you're writing a how-to book, let's say. But you don't have a sense of when it's complete. You have to have a very clear outline. With a novel, I find that, for me anyway, it's really final, when you get to that point where you say, okay, I've said everything that needs to be said, and the story's complete, and the journey is the way I want it to be. So I think that nonfiction, of course, being the first book I ever wrote, it's a matter of confidence too. And, you grow your writing skills over time. So I think it's those two things combined. With the fiction, I didn't really know if I could write fiction, and it never occurred to me to write historical fiction. But it only makes sense because that's the way I design my jewelry as well as the period I love. So I think it just flowed for me.
So what was your nonfiction about? Was it about
It
jewelry?
was about craft shows, selling at craft shows. So for artists, for
Okay.
jewelers actually, but it could be for any craft person. And then the wholesale book was for artists as well, how to sell your products to stores.
Okay. So now I know that at 20 Books Vegas, they were mentioning in-person events and going to like the farmers market and the craft places
Right.
to sell books. Have you tried like combining your jewelry and your books or anything like that?
Well, I don't sell at shows anymore. I gave that up. The pandemic kind of killed that. And then once I
Okay.
gave it up, I didn't want to go back. I've considered selling the books at in-person events, but I'm not sure what that would look like. And I would rather have many books before I set up at any show.
Hmm.
Yeah. And in terms of selling, I could certainly sell it at craft shows. Some craft shows would allow that, but I think that's for down the road if I will do that at all.
Okay. Excellent. And then um, going back to your second book you just published, I think last week. Can you just
Yeah.
walk me through that whole process for you? And was it any different from the first book you published?
It was a little different because the first book had a very complete storyline that I believe, followed the normal pattern of a novel. But the second book is the continuing story. So I had to play with it a little bit to make sure that I was hitting all the points I needed to in terms of interest and plot. In the end, it was like an evolution for the characters. So I had to change the focus a little bit because book one, the two characters meet and they fall in love, and book two is the continuing story and the evolution of their relationship. So it is slightly different. I had to take a different approach with that. And it has the same kind of lovely elements, but it's slightly different in that it's more delving a little deeper into their journey.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a favorite character that you've written?
I do. I have Penny, which I will keep throughout the whole series. Penny is a very bold woman. She speaks her mind, and you have to think that it's 1897, 1898, and the way she speaks is not very typical for the time. And she's very outgoing. She's not afraid of anything. She's kind of the woman I wish I could be. And she's always horribly bad at predicting the future, but she's very opinionated. So I made her character kind of the comic relief. And
Mhm.
she looks at things in the future and predicts social changes and how the world will be. And I relate it to our time with things like Google and Facebook,
Mhm.
how people interact in our time, dating, courting. And so she's a lot of fun. And I find that having a character like that has really helped me to be more creative because it's almost like she creates these things that I would never think of, but it's me thinking of it. So it's been a lot of fun to write her character.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So we met at 20 Books Vegas, and I'm asking every author who comes on here, what were your highlights or takeaways from this wonderful conference we attended?
Yeah, it was pretty wonderful. I think one of the things that really stuck with me. I found the AI very interesting, not in terms of writing story, but in terms of research. The other thing that really struck home with me was when a couple of the speakers shared their journey of sharing a little more deeply in their books, in their writing, and the doubt that they had in sharing something that was a little more personal.
Mhm.
And the result was that the readers really loved it. They loved it so much that they reached out to them and said, you shared this, and I have this story of my own, and I can relate to it. And I think that really sort of answered my own question in terms of sharing more deeply. And I think when you do that, you can reach people more deeply, and it enriches the story, you know. So I think that was probably one of the most beautiful things I took away from that.
Hey, I like that. Make it more put more of yourself into your
Yeah.
work.
And take risks, take some risks. I think that what when you want to reach people in a way that moves them, you have to take some risks.
Right. And I think Sasha Black, that was a big focus of hers, right? Was taking the
Yeah,
risks.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting. I made that connection with speakers, motivational speakers, pastors, anyone who gets up in front of a group. I noticed I went to this one church and this pastor, he was goofy as anything, and I'm not I'm not all that church experienced, we'll say. And this pastor made himself so vulnerable when he was talking about a personal time that he went through. And that reached me, like his vulnerability. And I noticed that in motivational speakers too, when they let you know of a tough time and they make themselves vulnerable, it makes them so much more approachable and relatable. So I think there's a connection there.
Absolutely. I think that you can't just tell a story. You need to feel it, and you need to share your own story in the story. You know,
Mhm.
your own deeper feelings about things, whether you're channeling your own history or the person you imagine or the people you've seen in your life, and how things have moved you, you know?
Mhm. Yes. So now, going with that, do you have any advice for new indie authors like myself?
Well, I'm pretty new myself. So
Okay, fair
I mean,
enough.
I have published a few books, but fiction is brand new for me. So
Mhm,
I think it's they talk about writing to market, and I think that's really important if you want to make a living at this. But at the same time, I really think that you can't sacrifice what when something really is important to you, what propels you to write. So I think there are ways to write to market and hit the points that might be popular while still being true to your own drive, your own desire. Because if you write to market too much, then you might find yourself writing either in a genre that you hate, or writing the kind of material that other people love but you find tedious, so you have to find that happy balance between you know marketing and giving people what they want to read, and writing what you're really driven to write. That would be my advice.
excellent, thank you, and I really like how you stress, yes, writing to market's important, but at the same time, you have to tell your story.
Mhm.
And I think another writer was on here about the whole, editing process and getting feedback and being careful not to respond so much to the feedback of and changing your story so that it's no longer your story.
Exactly. Yes, you can go back and you can change a lot and lose the essence of what you had. Yeah, definitely.
And you mentioned AI too, and I've since the conference downloaded Pro Writing Aid, I think it's called,
Right.
and I feel like that's AI because it gives me all these suggestions. All I do is highlight a word, and it's like, how would you like sensory? Would you like this? Would you like that? And then it gives me all these
Right.
crazy suggestions. But I'm noticing that I have to be careful because if I take too many of those suggestions, it's like I
Yeah.
lose. my voice, my author voice, and I'm like, so
Exactly. I guess it's like anything in life. We have so many options, and too many options aren't necessarily good. So you do need to maintain that focus of what your goal is and how you want to express yourself. But AI is, it's here to stay. It's the way of now. It's the way of the future, and it's the way of now. So I don't think I would use it for writing story, but
mhm.
it certainly has lots of value in terms of how you might describe your story or your book description, let's say, or your uh, character ideas. You might want some prompting for that, but you can still do it organically and write your own story.
I forgot to do this with my first few podcasts, but I know I have on here if you wanted to end with a reading of your book or a trailer or video or
Sure.
anything.
I could read the one scene about Penny's prediction.
Ooh, that'll be fun. So now, in which book is this from?
This is the book one, Vetiver
Okay.
Letters. It's just a short little scene where Marnie, the main character, is visiting her friend Gwendolyn, and Marnie's very distraught. So Gwendolyn has called Penny over, who Gwendolyn has never met Penny, but they hit it off. And, things progress nicely. They both support Marnie and they end up in Gwendolyn's father's library. And Penny is just impressed because she's an avid reader. So it's
Okay.
just a short scene. Um, okay, Penny looked indeed impressed by the magnificence of the room and the enormous number of books contained on the massive shelves. What an extensive library. You have everything at your fingertips here. She trailed her fingers over the books. There shall never be a more convenient or thorough way in which to search information in the comfort of one's own home. It is as if by magic genie one can ask a question and almost instantaneously an answer is provided. Never shall it become better than this. No, indeed, said Gwendolen. My cousin Arnold has a little saying. He's extremely well read and knowledgeable. Whenever I press him for information, if he doesn't know the answer, which is rare, he says, Sorry, it is not in my memory bank. You will have to encyclopedia it. Encyclopedia it? Good God, you can't use that as a verb. That is like saying, Why don't you dictionary it? I have always loathed such neologisms. For goodness sake, add ology to any word, and you have something altogether scientific by new definition. He may be knowledgeable, but he is set to destroy the English language. No offense regarding your cousin, Gwendolen. None taken, it is only his clever humor. I am sure he is not set to destroy the language. While it is humorous to say the least, there shall never come a time when we will allow the English language to be compromised by turning nouns into verbs. That's just a little one. So I was thinking of Google, because we all you say Google it now.
Absolutely. I'm a
Brain
teacher.
department.
It comes up all the time in class. Oh, I don't, but let's Google it. I don't know the answer.
We're all used to that now. All the words are changing.
Yeah, it was great. Last year I had a student teacher who always had his cell phone in his pocket. So whenever we needed something, he'd be like, okay, and Google it. But at the beginning, she's also talking about libraries and how you have a, you know, that's never going to get any better than this. And so,
Yes.
of course, that's funny too.
I think she says the same thing about catalog shopping, that it'll never be easier than to have a large catalog in one's lap. That's the way we'll be buying in the future.
Oh, but you know what? I grew up with those catalogs in my Nana's house, and I used to love going through them. I was fascinated because they were huge catalogs. Oh,
Uh,
that's
that's
cool.
one reason, probably the biggest reason why I love the period so much is when I was 8. I don't know how I got my hands on one of those old Sears Roebuck
Mhm.
catalogs.
Yes.
And I used to just fantasize that
Mhm.
I could go shopping and buy one of those $1.85 dresses because the
Yes.
price points were perfect for an 8-year-old. But now, now it's, coming out in my work, and it never occurred to me that one day I would write historical romance, and all that stuff from my past is just feeding that.
Well, and since you mention it, I love reading historical fiction. That's probably one of my favorite genres to read in. And I started off writing in historical fiction, but it requires so much research. How much
Yes, it does.
research? I mean,
I,
like, how much research did you spend? I mean, you wrote it in 5 weeks, but did you
right?
research it beforehand?
While I was writing it, I researched, but
Okay.
I started with some things that I already knew about. One of them is a lot of the two books touch on locations in Toronto, like the Canadian National Exhibition, which used to be the Toronto Industrial Fair, and it was around since 1879. So I already had a fair bit of information. I just really needed to go online and confirm certain things. I also check multiple sources because people write out articles based on other people's articles, and things get repeated that are just aren't true.
Mm.
I did do a lot of research, and some of the stuff, surprisingly, I knew, and I don't know how I knew. Like one of the stores I wrote about in the book, it was a glove store. I knew exactly where it was. It's on King Street East, just just east of Yonge on the south side. And I was sure I saw it there in my mind. And then about 2 months later, I found an old directory from 1884. And sure enough, there was a glove store, and it would have been a very fine glove store right in that spot. I don't
Awesome.
know where that came
I
from.
know. Well, that's
Maybe I
excellent.
was a Victorian woman in Toronto in the 1800s,
Right.
1800s.
Yeah, well, I know, so my first writing I did really was set in the 1860s, the Pony Express and the Civil War. Yeah, I have my character running through being around a battle and down in Tennessee that just absolutely destroyed Tennessee. And so you can imagine how much research went into that.
Yes, yes.
And then I would lose myself. I'd get really fascinated with battle formations. I'm like, how do you write and research at the same time? I would lose myself for hours reading about it.
I know, I'm very detailed. Like if I say it's a full moon that night, it's a full moon that night. If there was some snow in April, there was some snow in April. I like to be accurate.
Thank you for that. I read a contemporary fiction book. I'm not going to name any names, but it was set in Long Beach, California, Southern California. In February, they had characters wearing bikinis and sundresses. I grew up in Southern California. We actually do have a winter. It's not all that impressive, but the winter happens in just late December through January through February. Unfortunately, it does rain in Southern California. It's 60s. We're not wearing sundresses and bikinis in February.
Yes. When I used to do craft shows in the US, I would always joke to my fellow exhibitors that as soon as I crossed the border to Canada, I got on my skidoo and headed straight for my igloo. Luckily, they had a sense of humor.
So do you have anything else you want to share?
Um, well, I think the only thing I would share is that for me anyway, the writing journey for fiction has been ultra healing because you can write about things that you feel and nobody would ever know what comes from you or your imagination. You can write about your past. You can know
Mhm.
characters by wounds from the past or watching other people, observing other people who have wounds. And I find that writing can not only provide entertainment and uh, joy in the writing craft, but it can be very healing and open up your world, if you are in tune with all the nuances of relationships and characters and emotions. That's my experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for adding that because I think a whole bunch of us have been probably writing for years that haven't been published yet. And so we probably have healthier lives for it. We just don't know that. We just don't know it.
Oh,
Well,
publish. It's important to publish.
right. I'm getting there. I'm actually, my goal was March and might be able to scoot it up a little bit and get published in the end of February for my first book. So I'm getting
Nice.
there. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was really nice. It was
Yes.
fun.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Feel free to subscribe, like us, rate us. Look forward to seeing you next time.